There's a version of you that was never born. Not the one you see in the mirror, not the one who answers to a name, plays a role, wears a smile just convincing enough to pass. I'm talking about the real you. The one that watches quietly when your thoughts spiral, when your actions betray your truth, when you feel hollow. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But what if we told you that you've been running from that privilege your entire life? What if the very identity you've spent years building, your job title, your beliefs, your reputation, is actually a carefully constructed mask? And behind that mask lies a stranger, a forgotten self, a sleeping giant. In this video, we're going to walk you into the depths of that forgotten self. This isn't just psychology. This is philosophy that cuts to the bone. We'll dive into Jung's most profound insights on the shadow, the persona, projection, and the sacred path to individuation, the only process that can bring you true inner peace. By the end, you won't just understand yourself more deeply. You'll see the world with different eyes. Let's begin. You've lived your whole life under a name. From the moment you could speak, you were told who you are. Be a good boy. Act like a lady. Don't say that. That's not how we do things. And so you learned, not who you are, but who they needed you to be. Before you even had the chance to ask, "What am I?" you were handed a script, a personality, a pattern. And slowly, without realizing it, you stepped into a costume stitched from praise, punishment, culture, and fear. A mask tailored by expectation. One that looked close enough to real to fool even you. Carl Jung called this mask the persona, a necessary facade we present to the world. It helps us function in society. It protects us, shapes us, organizes our chaos. But there's a cost. The more we rely on the persona, the more we forget that it is a mask. Think about it. When was the last time you said something just to avoid conflict? Smiled when you were drowning inside? Nodded in agreement, not because you believed, but because silence was safer? Each of those moments is a crack in the illusion. And through those cracks, something deeper begins to stir. A whisper from within, saying, "This isn't all there is. This isn't all I am." Most people ignore that voice. They drown it in distraction. They decorate the mask. They chase success, status, applause, believing if they can just perfect the image, maybe the emptiness will disappear. But it doesn't, because the soul cannot be fooled. And the longer you wear the mask, the heavier it becomes. Eventually, it starts to fracture. And when it does, something else awakens, something ancient, buried, powerful, and often terrifying. This is where the real journey begins. But to understand where we're going, we must first understand where it all began, how the mask was formed, and why we became strangers to ourselves in the first place. From the moment you're born, you are pure potential. A chaotic, brilliant spark of awareness. You don't yet know shame. You don't know right or wrong. You don't even know that you are separate from the world around you. You feel everything, fully, instinctively. But the world isn't ready for raw essence. So almost immediately, your environment begins to mold you. Your family, your culture, your religion, your school, they all pass down their silent laws. What you should say, what you should never say, what you must become, what you must never be. To be loved, you learn to adapt. To be safe, you begin to suppress. When you express joy and someone smiles, you keep doing it. When you show anger and get punished, you hide it. Over time, you start associating good with acceptance and bad with rejection. But here's the catch. The parts of you that were labeled bad didn't disappear. They were just buried, exiled, forgotten. And in their place, a persona was born, a carefully curated identity designed not for truth, but for survival. Maybe you became the pleaser, the achiever, the rebel, the caretaker. Maybe you wore confidence like armor, or silence like a shield. Whatever form it took, your persona became the version of you that the world clapped for. And so you clung to it. But deep underneath the applause and roles, your true self didn't die. It just waited. Because no matter how convincing the act, something inside always remembers. And eventually, that something comes knocking, not to destroy you, but to invite you back. See, the parts of you that were hidden away, they never stopped whispering. They show up in your triggers, your dreams, your unexplained fears. They live in the things you overreact to, the things you're drawn to, the people you can't stand, and the ones you can't forget. Carl Jung called this the shadow, not because it's evil, but because it's unconscious. It holds all the things you've disowned, all the feelings you weren't allowed to feel, all the truths you were too afraid to speak. But here's the paradox. Everything you seek to become is inside the very parts you tried to erase. Your vitality lives inside your rage. Your confidence hides behind your shame. Your freedom is buried beneath your fear. And so the journey back to your true self isn't about becoming something new. It's about remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. But remembering isn't easy, because facing the shadow feels like death. Not a physical one, but a psychological death. The death of certainty. The death of the mask. The death of who you thought you had to be. But make no mistake, that death is sacred, because only when the false self dies can the real one begin to breathe. But not without pain, because before rebirth comes the unraveling. The illusions must die. The illusion that healing will feel good. The illusion that growth is linear. The illusion that truth will always bring peace. No, sometimes truth shatters. Sometimes it scorches the ground before it builds anything new. And this is where most people turn back. Not because they're weak, but because no one told them that awakening can feel like breaking. You see, the ego, your constructed identity, doesn't go quietly. It clings to control, to the narrative, to the familiar prison it calls freedom. It tells you, better to be liked than to be real. Better to be numb than to feel this deeply. Better to keep the mask than risk being seen. But those are ghosts talking. Ghosts of old wounds, old fears, old versions of you that never got to grow up. And unless you confront them, unless you stare them down and say, I see you, but I'm not you anymore, they'll run your life from the shadows. So the death of illusions is brutal, but necessary. Because you can't meet your true self in a house built on lies. You have to be willing to burn the whole thing down, to feel lost, empty, undone. Because it's in that emptiness that something ancient begins to stir. Not the voice of the world, not the programming of parents or peers or pain, but something deeper. The murmur of the unconscious, the call of the soul. This is the descent, not into darkness, but into origin, into the places you were told not to go, into feelings you were told to avoid, into truths you buried just to survive. You are not falling apart. You are falling inward. This is where you meet the raw material of who you are, before the stories, before the masks, before the roles. You begin to notice the subtle layers beneath your reactions. You get curious about your anger instead of ashamed of it. You explore your sadness instead of numbing it. You sit with your anxiety not as an enemy, but as a messenger. And that's when things shift. Because what you run from runs you, but what you face frees you. This descent isn't depression. It's initiation. It's the soul reclaiming its voice, its vision, its power. But only if you're willing to stay, to not rush to fix, to solve, to escape. Because in the very depths you feared to feel, that's where the gold is buried. Let that sink in. Now you've tasted the depths. You can't go back to the surface and pretend it's home. You've seen the blueprint behind your behaviors. You've felt the origin of your pain. You've heard the voice beneath the noise. Now comes the real alchemy, living it. Embodiment is not about knowledge. It's not about how many books you've read or how many quotes you've memorized. It's about what you do in the moment the old pattern returns. It's about pausing when your ego wants to defend. It's about breathing when your trauma wants to run. It's about choosing presence over projection. You don't need to be perfect. You need to practice awareness. Because awareness, repeated, becomes presence. Presence, repeated, becomes character. And character becomes your reality. This is where your shadow becomes your strength. Your triggers become your teachers. And your wounds become portals, not scars to hide, but doorways you walk through every day. This is not about changing yourself. It's about returning to yourself. Walking into rooms as your full energy. Speaking truths that once trembled in your throat. Setting boundaries without guilt, because you finally remember. Your peace is not up for negotiation. You begin to feel the shift. From victim to vessel. From seeker to seer. From reactive to rooted. And all of this? It doesn't scream. It radiates. And when it radiates, something strange happens. You stop needing to prove anything. You stop explaining yourself to people who were never trying to understand. You stop chasing moments because you've become the moment. This is the quiet art of integration. It's when the inner work you've done begins to show in your ordinary life. Not in dramatic breakthroughs, but in small sacred decisions. You respond calmly to a comment that would have once triggered a storm. You say no without guilt. You rest without trying to earn it. You notice beauty in places you used to ignore. You become congruent. Your words match your values. Your actions match your healing. Your presence matches your truth. And when that alignment starts to settle into your nervous system, you begin to feel safe inside yourself. Not because the world is safe, but because you are safe in the world. This is where philosophy becomes lifestyle, where insight becomes instinct. You don't just speak of the shadow, you dance with it. You don't just know detachment, you live it. You don't just seek peace, you walk into every room you enter. And the best part? You're no longer obsessed with becoming someone. You're simply returning to the one you were before the world told you who to be. But there's one more step, one last initiation most people miss. The return. After all the silence, shadow work, observation, and embodiment, you must come back to the world. Because real transformation isn't proven in solitude. It's proven in relationship. Can you carry your stillness into chaos? Can you hold your boundaries without building walls? Can you honor your truth in rooms filled with noise? This is where philosophy becomes more than thought. It becomes compassion. You begin to see that others are not behind you. They're not asleep. They're simply carrying battles you can't see. And the more you return to yourself, the less you need others to change for you to feel peace. That's the paradox. You do all this inner work to feel whole, only to realize your wholeness was never missing. It was just covered by layers of survival. Now, you don't need to preach what you've learned. You don't need to prove your awareness. You become a mirror, reflecting back what others have forgotten in themselves. Not to change them, but to remind them of their own journey inward. That is how transformation echoes. And when people ask, "Where have you been?" you'll smile and answer, "I've been home, inside." You see, the journey back to your true self is not loud. It doesn't demand applause. It doesn't need validation. It's silent, subtle, unfolding in everyday moments. Like the way you pause before reacting. The way you listen without interrupting. The way you no longer need the last word. Because peace matters more than being right. This isn't self-help. It's self-remembrance. And if something in this message sparked something in you, maybe it's not by accident. Maybe you've been quietly waiting for this moment to start your own return. So take a breath, close your eyes, and ask yourself, who was I before the noise? Then go meet that version. They've missed you. If this resonated deeply, share it with someone who's ready to remember themselves. And subscribe for more journeys like this. Because here, we don't chase noise. We listen for truth. See you in the next one.